The City of Monte Sereno City Council meeting for Tuesday, January 21st, 2020 is now called to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Elahi. Councilmember LaBouvet.
Present.
Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Luthold.
Present.
And Mayor Lawler.
Present.
Thank you.
Are there any changes to the orders of the day? Seeing none. Do we have any oral communications on items not on the agenda? Yep, moving on, no written communications. On to the consent calendar. Are there any members of the council who have any questions on anything in the consent calendar?
Yes, I've got a couple. First of all, on the warrant list, there were two items that I'm interested in seeing more information about. That is the, well, the first question I had was on the plans review consultant, $18,956. I'm wondering if that is a standard monthly charge. Is that for what period of time are we looking at for that? Or is it on the basis of hours or sets of plans? Do we know that?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So this is based on the amount of work that we have coming through the organization in our building department. So Ali Fatehpour, as you know, is handling all the plan check documents, and this is not necessarily a fixed amount or not necessarily a monthly amount. This amount can be higher, it can be lower, but this was the amount of his billing needed for this cycle for the work that he had performed. This is a cost recovery item, so whatever the city charges, Ali collects back with his billing, and then he gives the city a bill, so we then compensate him. So that's what that figure represents for this month.
But he's basically, am I right, that this is essentially a replacement for Rob's position, or is this something separate and apart from that?
No, this is something separate and apart from Rob's position. Ali always performed the plan check services, so he has always been a part of that process and has always, to my knowledge, submitted a bill to our organization in the past. I've only been here 1 month, but that's the way I understand it.
Okay, so, but as we look through January, he's going to be doing a whole bunch more workload than on top of his regular workload? Or are we going to have someone else who's covering for Rob?
So right now we have a building inspector on a contract basis. They charge $125 per building inspection. So that individual is performing largely the work that Rob Chiaro was performing as the building officer. And then Ali performs the plan check as the other portion of the process. But I could say that Ali is not performing a great portion of Rob's former position now.
And then the second question I had was just wondering if we can see, or if someone can send me a copy of the Burke-Williams Sorensen bill at some point, just to see what they're billing, how they're billing, what their bills look like.
So would you like to see a complete breakdown of the way you would see an ordinary legal bill?
Yeah.
With the hours and the minutes and all the conversations and correspondence?
Yes, however they're doing that. I know some lawyers are in great detail, some lawyers are very, very little detail, so I wanted to see what they're billing us and what it looks like.
Certainly. Mr. Rudin, is that possible for you to?
Yes. You know, certain parts of the bill will have to be redacted because, you know, our attorney bills are not public records, but other than that, yes.
Okay, so yeah, that can be shared, again, maybe even under attorney-client if that's appropriate. Okay, so those were my questions on that item on the warrant list. I have a couple of other questions on another item. Do we want to do all the warrant list questions?
Sure.
If you, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
finish your turn, go
I
ahead.
mean, if anybody else has other warrant list questions, I had something on other items.
I do too. Go, you've got
Okay,
the floor.
all right. So the other issue that I wanted to take a look at. Maybe nothing else on the consent calendar. I'm good.
All right. Councilmember Labouvet, do you have anything?
No comments.
Member Turner?
No comments.
I have one quick question regarding item 5. I understand there are former council members that are signatories on the city's investment account. Mr. Rudin, is this common practice to have council members as signatories?
Typically, no. Usually, from the examples that I've seen from the state, it's usually the city manager or the finance director, or sometimes both. Typically, in a lot of instances, it just designates that title by position, so that there's not actually a specific person that's authorized, so.
Okay, then in the resolution, I would like to have language rendering null and void all previous signatories, as that wasn't necessarily clear in the resolution put forth.
Sure, that's something we could add if you pull the item from the consent calendar.
Okay. Then, I'd like to, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar minus item 5?
How do we, let me see.
Are you able to?
Sure,
make a motion?
I can make a motion. I
Okay.
move to approve.
I second.
I have a motion and a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar with the exception of item number,
5.
would be able to vote. 3 votes in, 4 votes. Okay, all votes are in. And the consent calendar passes 4-0 with 1 absence.
Thank you. Moving on to public hearings.
I suspect we want to complete item 5 on the consent calendar.
Oh, yes, of course.
And my question to the council would be, so the last resolution on creating late signatories was Resolution 3453. I suspect it would be sufficient just to add some language, a new section 3 that says, let's see. This resolution, or resolution number 3453 is hereby rescinded.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Did we see 3453?
If you would like to see it, certainly, I think staff can find it.
What was it?
3453, the one you sent me earlier today.
I can find it. I'd have to go.
So
print
we're
that.
just getting rid of it? Is
You're
it-
rescinding it.
Shouldn't we just do it the way the mayor did, which is to rescind all prior
Yes,
authorizations?
just with language
So
in
you're
this
rescinding
resolution.
everything
Ri-
from that?
In this resolution that's being proposed, that there be language in there that renders null and void all previous signatories.
Okay.
Just to be clear. I mean, I know it's probably implied, but I think I'd rather have it be clear.
Yeah, that's fine. So are we proposing a section 3 to this resolution that
Yes.
says, this resolution supersedes and rescinds all prior authorizations for other life signatories?
Yes.
Okay.
So you should be able to make a motion. Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Turner, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Luthold. You should be able to vote.
Not on lead abatement.
Oh.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Oh, no, jumped the gun.
doesn't want to let me go back. So this is that it's on the LAIF resolution, to clarify. I'm sorry, it won't allow me to go back. So I had a motion by I'm sorry. Okay, for whatever reason, it will not allow me to go back. So could I get the motion again, please?
It was for me.
Okay, Councilmember Lawler, and then I had a second from Mayor Pro Tem Luthold.
Correct.
Okay. There you go.
No, that's not correct. Right?
Member Turner?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Sorry about that. Okay, so now you should be able to vote. All votes are in, and it passes 4-0.
We
Sorry
still
about
have
that.
voting,
Pardon me?
we still have a voting block on our screens for item 9.
Hopefully it'll go away because I don't have it.
Okay.
Sorry.
So we are discussing item number 9. I think Councilmember Labouvet, you need to be recused.
Yeah, so on item number 9, there's a property on the list that's within 500 feet of my property, so I'll abstain from that vote or recuse.
And since this is actually not on the consent calendar, there is a requirement that you have to leave the room for the item.
Mr. Leonardis, is there a staff report?
Thank you, Mayor. There is no staff report this evening on this item. We do have a resolution. This is part of our annual weed abatement. And if there are any questions for staff, we will be happy to answer those now. If not, we could go on with discussion and/or motion.
Any council members with questions, or do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Actually, this is a public hearing, so we have to open it up to the
Oh, I'm
public.
sorry.
Yeah.
Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
The owner on the property on Greenwood Road, 16005 Greenwood Lane. And basically, I was trying to understand, what are the implications of this particular motion if it passes on my property and, the fiscal responsibilities. I tried to contact the weed inspector, the weed abatement department, and I couldn't get hold of them. So at this point, I want to understand, what it means, if this motion passes.
All right, thank you. Mr. Leonardis, are you able to answer that question?
I think so. So every year, we have this weed abatement program that we adopt. And if your property is on the list, that means that you are part of this program and that you are responsible to take care of the weeds, cut them down. It's for fire safety. And if you do not do that, I guess the fire department comes out and will do it for you, and they will bill you. So,
Right, my big question is, how did my property even get on? Because last year we maintained it, and last year, when I talked to the weed abatement, it was not on the list. And now it's on the list, and right now I have some story poles on the property in anticipation of future development. And I will continue to have the story poles on the thing, and that's going to create, some issues in terms of clearing the weeds, and it needs to be done in a certain manner. So I'm just concerned that, it's going to come in the way of, trying to push through my development plans in the process of this, and how suddenly it got onto the weed abatement list.
So I cannot answer how it suddenly became part of the weed abatement list. Personally, I don't know if,
Yeah.
Ms. Hamilton, if you can elaborate on.
Well, my understanding is that sometimes properties get on based on a complaint to the fire. Many times, the fire department is proactive, and they go out and they survey properties, and they do it. I also understand that you may have remedied the situation this year, but you will stay on the list for a few years so that they will go in and re-inspect and just stay on top of it. So I think, if you did take care of it, as I've mentioned, just be diligent and try and touch base with the weed abatement program personnel, and I think they'll help alleviate any concerns you may have if you are proactive in maintaining the weeds on your property. And now, being the winter weather, it may not be as big an issue if there's, a little bit of growth. But again, just be diligent in trying to get in touch with them. And I think, if you are proactive, then it should work out. And they'll help better explain how long you may stay on a list, regardless of whether or not you are still, taking care of it. It's,
Right.
I think it's more of a help to ensure that you keep on top of it, before you come off. That sort of
Right,
thing.
but in the Santa Clara County, being on the weed abatement list, it's self-compliant, and you actually work with them, but I'm still trying to understand what this motion is about, right? Why would the city council needs to pass this motion in order to have a different department enforce that? That's the only question.
I think the county looks for each individual cities to manage the public hearing portions of this whole program, since they're not in a position. So each city countywide goes through the same process, so that it's everybody knows about it. We basically administer the public hearing portion of the process, is my understanding.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
And for the city council's benefit, the action that's before you tonight would be to authorize the county to go and perform the formal weed abatement for properties that have not already corrected. The council previously adopted a resolution declaring that, unabated weeds are a public nuisance. Owners have provided notice following that and an opportunity to correct. By the action you guys are taking tonight, you're basically allowing the city to go and undertake that abatement at property owner's expense, and to, have persons on behalf of the city enter their private property to go and fix that. Now, if people have already corrected the abatement before city agents or staff or the county show up to go and do that work, they're not going to be billed for the work.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve?
Yes.
Do we have a second?
Yes.
So I have a motion by Councilmember Turner, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Luthold. Should be able to vote. All three votes are in, and it passes 3-0. Thank you.
Retrieve Councilmember Labouvet.
We're stuck.
It's stuck.
Still stuck at
Your
amend.
refresh button.
I
Can't get out.
Go out, come in, and rejoin.
How did you?
I would just completely swipe it out.
Thank you.
So double click.
Double click on which?
On your power button,
I did.
and then swipe it,
Swipe it off.
go like that, and then reopen it.
Now come back into Granicus.
This is the first I've seen it as well.
Is everybody back online? Okay, item 10. Is there a staff report, Mr. Leonardis?
Yes, Ms. Hamilton will
Okay,
be
Ms.
delivering the staff report this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Lawler and council members. Before you this evening is a proposed ordinance amending the city's regulations related to accessory dwelling units to bring our Muni Code up to date with the most recent state laws that were signed by the governor last October. In the staff report, page 2 highlights those areas that I think are most relevant to these changes, and I'll go over them briefly with a little bit more explanation, which again, I go on to under the analysis. I think one of the major areas that is affected is that we can no longer require a minimum lot size for the establishment of any sort of accessory dwelling unit or junior accessory dwelling unit, and I'll explain that later. Previously, we had required a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet, so this ordinance eliminates that altogether. The other major area is that the state has now set minimum size standards, and whereas before we required, 600 square feet for an attached dwelling unit in the R18, now at the minimum we have to allow for an 850 square foot accessory dwelling unit or 1,000 square foot accessory dwelling unit if more than one bedroom is provided for. So, and we, did you hand this out? We've actually amended the table in the draft ordinance that we had distributed previously to more accurately reflect that. So you'll see that, in the R18 and R120, it's the size is, we have to allow at a minimum 850 square feet, whether it's attached or detached, or 1,000 square feet or accessory dwelling. We are still allowing the 1,200 square feet in the R144. And then we also had to add provisions for our multifamily districts and the other districts where residential is allowed, where previously it was just in the R18, 20, and 44. So these laws now say you have to allow accessory dwelling units in any district where residential uses are allowed. So we've now reflected that in all of our districts where residential uses are allowed. The other major change you'll see is we now are allowing for junior accessory dwelling units, whereas previously cities had the option of allowing them or not. The recent legislation now requires cities to provide for a junior accessory dwelling unit. Junior accessory dwelling unit is defined as more of an efficiency type unit. Has to be a minimum 150 square feet, but maximum 500 square feet. It can share sanitary facilities with another dwelling, and actually for purposes of the building code is not defined as a separate dwelling unit, so therefore doesn't have to have the fire separations. It does, though, have to have cooking appliances and counter area, whatnot, for preparation, food preparation. So there's a little more definition to what, how the interior of a junior accessory dwelling unit has to be designed. I think one of the other major changes, and I'm going to go a little out of order of the staff report, is now we can no longer require that for accessory dwelling units that are built between January 1st, 2020 and January 1st, 2025, we can no longer require owner occupancy restrictions. Ones built prior to January 1st, 2020, still have that restriction in place. This provision is set to sunset again in 2025 if it makes its way into another legislation. We'll, have to keep watch on that. There are still owner occupancy restrictions on junior accessory dwelling units because, again, I think the thought is that, they may share same space and whatnot. So you'll see in the ordinance that we still do restrict that and require some deed restrictions to be placed for those. There is also the ability to prohibit the use of accessory dwelling units for short-term rentals. We've included that in our proposed ordinance. There's more changes in the regulations related to parking. Previously, they did create a number of exceptions to parking. Now they've gone even further and said that when existing parking is demolished or converted, we can no longer require replacement, even if it is that required parking for the primary dwelling. So again, you'll see that reflected. Timing, they talk about, putting the timing restrictions of 60 days. We don't run into that at all. These are all building permit applications. So they're typically, any timing issues are usually on the applicant's side. City staff is usually spends 3 to 4 weeks maximum in the review of these applications. Any additional time is usually on the applicant's side. So hopefully we won't be running into any of the timing issues. Back on page 2 of the staff report talks about number of dwelling units on a residential parcel. With all of the language in the state legislation, it basically, where did I put it on page?
Can you tell us what page you're on, Jean?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to find it.
I think 6 of 9.
It's on page 6 of the staff report. That's where I go into a little more detail of, with all the regulations and the language, it basically sets it up so that a single parcel can have up to 3 dwelling units on it. And you'll have the primary residence, and that you could also have attached to that primary residence a junior accessory dwelling unit, and then you can have a detached accessory dwelling unit. So there's your 3 units. Or you could have a primary dwelling unit with an attached accessory dwelling unit and also a detached accessory dwelling unit. Or you can have a primary dwelling unit, you can have a detached accessory dwelling unit with an attached junior accessory dwelling unit to that, detached. So there's a few different configurations that get you to the 3 dwelling units. We'll see how that all plays out, but that interpretation is pretty consistent citywide as far as the 3 units on each residential parcel, again, regardless of size. The only other item, and it doesn't come into play that much with us, is that it, limits the ability to assess impact fees on accessory dwelling units less than 750 square feet. We don't really have any impact fees. We have road impact fees, and to the extent that, I don't even know if we assess them on accessory dwelling units. But we don't have park fees, and the school takes care of those, and whether or not those aren't utility fees. And I don't know where the legislation stands on the school impact fee. Some don't even assess ADUs if they're less than 500 square feet or something. Can't speak to the school fees, and then the other thing that we did with this ordinance was addressed some clarifications in our language. Probably the biggest one is related to how we refer to setbacks. It can get kind of confusing in our ordinance because if you used it at all, we talk about the front yard, the side yard, and the rear yard, which in essence is the front setback, side setback, and rear setback. But then in other areas, we do talk about a front yard, which is defined differently than a setback. So we integrated the term setback. We replaced setback where we used yard for the development standards. Additionally, we also included definitions for the junior accessory dwelling unit. We included the accessory dwelling unit and junior accessory dwelling unit in the use tables. And what else did we do? I think is that enough? I think that's about it. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions
Any questions?
and clear up any confusion.
Councilman Delotte?
I have a question. Can you please clarify, what is the difference between the 850 square foot standard and the 800 square foot standard, and when are those two numbers applied?
So the legislation said that if in doing an 850 square foot, there was a violation of some other development standard, for example, floor area ratio, but in our case, we have structural coverage or impervious coverage, that at a minimum, we had to allow an 800 square foot accessory dwelling unit. So they may violate that structural coverage standard, but at a minimum, we have to allow the 800 square feet.
But since we're not allowed to impose any minimums, is 850 always the number now, or we can limit to 800?
No, 850 is,
So to clarify, the state law says that our maximum size limitation in our local regulations has to at least be 850 square feet, or 1,000 square feet if it provides for more than one bedroom. And additionally, there's a separate prohibition that's imposed on the city, which says that you shall not apply any limits on lot coverage, floor area ratio, open space, or minimum lot size that does not permit an 800 square foot accessory dwelling unit that is at least 16 feet in height with 4 foot side and rear setbacks. So basically, although we set our standards at, a maximum of 850 square foot, if we're imposing certain other restrictions that would somehow lessen what someone was allowed to build below 800, we couldn't hold them to that particular, say, coverage standard or floor area ratio requirement or landscaping requirement. We'd have to, put a carve out that allows them to at least put an 800 square foot ADU.
Is there a situation where you can run up against that? And because it says 850, so I don't see how you can ever get to the lower limit of 800.
yeah, if people are, the structural coverage in some districts is 20%, you'd be surprised. People are running up against it. It's 30% in the R120. So again, regardless of lot size. R18, it's, 40% is structural coverage. So yeah, you may very well run up against those.
So how would you apply that standard? So as you're calculating structural coverage, for example, if you came up with something that was less than 800 square feet, you would have to somehow increase the structural coverage by some small percentage in order to get to the 800?
No, you don't increase the structural coverage, you just allow, for example, if they were, right now, if the structural coverage on a lot, absent an accessory dwelling unit, was, in the R18, was 38%, okay? And they propose a accessory dwelling unit and it takes them over the 40%, because you only have 2% coverage left. We, at the minimum, have to allow 800 square foot ADU, correct?
Yeah, instead of prohibiting the project.
And that 800 ADU may take them up to 42%.
Right.
So we're just allowing the 800, we're not allowing the 42%. It's whatever that 800 gets them up to, and then,
And no, in this instance, they wouldn't be entitled to build a 1,000 square foot unit with more than one bedroom. They would be entitled to 800 square
800.
foot unit.
So that 800 is clarified somewhere in the code, so that you can make that exception as you're calculating those other requirements?
yeah, it's talked about in relation to other development standards. If another development standard is impeding their ability to create that unit, it's limited to 800 square feet.
Okay. My second question relates to, so it looks like we have slightly higher standards than what state law requires in some of the other zoning districts. So for example, in R18, we're allowing a detached unit of 900 square feet, whereas it could be a state minimum of 850.
That's what our current allowance is, so we didn't ratchet it back. We kept with the same. Currently, it's a 600 square foot attached, 900 square foot detached, so we just modified the attached, and we kept it at the allowance at what you could do.
So in light of the fact that we can have ADUs on top of ADUs and so forth, that the new state legislation, essentially allows you to compound and grow ADUs, I would suggest that we adopt the minimum state standards, and which is already basically going to a triplex type situation, and so that would be, of course, much more dense, but on the other hand, I think we should start with base units as being the minimum state standards. And so if there's council agreement towards that, I would like to make a motion that we, in all of the zoning districts, we take the standards, the size limitations to the state standard.
So at this point, we're in the middle of a public hearing, so we first have to, at this point, right now, we're
discuss it first.
taking
All right, let's discuss
questions
it.
from council for staff, and then we'd be taking public comment and then having deliberation.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about page 4, number 10, the design. Now, from my understanding, these AB 68, 881, and 13 are ministerial, right? So basically, an ADU builder can apply for and receive construction permits over the counter. And then the city planning office, we don't have to have an approval by the design commission or city council, is that correct?
Yeah,
That's
there's no
correct.
discretionary permit design review. These are codified performance standards, which is different than design review. They're specific to the materials in color, texture, and appearance. So these are objective performance standards, not subjective. So these were have been part of the previous regulations that first put into play the inability for us to require discretionary review permit. So back in, was it 2 years ago? What's the year, 2017, when these went into effect, was you can codify objective design standards.
Okay, I'd like to make a note of that as well. Here's my concern. For the city of Monte Sereno, we rely heavily on ADUs to meet our RENA numbers. And the Cities Association of Santa Clara County has already told us that we need to expect anywhere from 50% increase of our RENA numbers to 250% increase. So rather than adding any more limitations and many more problems for somebody building an ADU, I would suggest that we minimize it and take it to the state level.
Are you finished? Councilmember Luthold or Mayor Pro Tem Luthold?
It's not really directly on this, but maybe if we get the answer now, then I won't have to remember to ask the question later. And that is, junior ADUs, are they helpful to our RENA numbers, or are they falling outside in terms of our low income and our total numbers of units? Is a junior ADU going to help with our RENA numbers?
I would guess that they would, because again, they are an accessory dwelling unit. So they will be new housing units.
This may be something for us to publicize regarding the new law at the appropriate time as we get to a new set of RENA numbers. Obviously, we don't need it until 2023 probably, but this may be something that is a helpful solution, as Councilmember Turner pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, just to add another piece of information, I've been carrying around this report card from the newspaper from a few weeks ago, and it reported that in 2023, we're required to have 23 units, and we currently have 29. And so we're already over our allotment, and so, you know, encouraging beyond, basically, I think, you know, Monte Sereno will eventually saturate in terms of ADU, you know, building, and so we might like to save our allocations and spread it out over time so that when we get to our next RENA allotments, that those are credited appropriately.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
I was talking to the city council member of Campbell, and basically what happened to them is they passed their resolution for these ADU bills, but added other improvements as well, just like this design guideline. And what happened, according to them, is that they were asked to remove all other extraneous rules other than what the state actually had asked for. So I just wanted you to know that, and maybe you could do a little bit of investigation and
The state asked them to remove things?
somebody asked them to remove it, so they had to go back and change their resolution to remove, like, design.
Okay. The state has had this, like I said, this language has been in for a couple years, and HCD has had our ordinance since that time. So, you know, it really is, it's very common to have these in. It hasn't been a problem with us. I think most people want to put any accessory structure on their site that appears to, you know, fit with the larger property. I think it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's not a lot of thought on my part. You know, I look at what's there. I see what they proposed. You know, there's also opportunity when it talks about the extent feasible. It does give us some ability to flex, you know, for some property owners, because we're going to see a lot more prefab structures come onto the sites, and they're going to have to do some modifications. So there is the ability to flex from a staff standpoint to accommodate those varied designs. So I haven't yet denied anything.
So let me make one more comment. We got this letter from the Californians for home ownership, and I wanted you to take a look at this. And it says, noting that those ADUs do not necessitate a zoning clearance, must not be limited to certain zones or areas, or subject to height, lot size, lot coverage, unit size, architectural review, landscape, or parking requirements. So I just wanted us to be aware, if we're going to approve anything, that we don't go back later on and say we made a mistake, and we just have to go back and change. So I think we just have to be cognizant of some of the things that have come up.
All right. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this item? None? Further discussion? This, Jeannie, this proposed ordinance is designed to meet minimum state requirements, correct? Other than the 900 square foot that was originally
Pretty much, yeah.
in there. And so Councilmember Labouvet is suggesting
And
changing that to 850.
again, building off our previous ordinance that complied with previous state regulation.
Okay, and also, my understanding is that we're maintaining the ability to have some sort of control on design aesthetics, to a degree.
Yeah, it's codified performance standards that are pretty objective. And again, with respect to Councilmember Labouvet's, again, we didn't want to take a step back, because there are people in the R144s that are building 1,200 square feet, and then to, ratchet it back to 1,000. Staff didn't feel comfortable making those sorts of changes. There's a standard already in place, so we were just trying to kind of stick with those existing standards and integrate the new state
So,
standards.
so if somebody wanted to build something bigger than 850, it would just, this doesn't preclude it, it just means that it would go through a different approval process, is that correct? So if the lot was big, for example, as you indicated, as is the case with many of our lots,
No,
they can still go through some sort of a different approval process?
no, we currently don't require any different approval process other than a building
Well, I mean,
permit.
for example, if they wanted to build a secondary structure and their lot met all of the other building requirements, they could certainly go ahead and build that without ministerial approval, right?
I'm sorry, you mean just a standard accessory structure, not a dwelling unit?
Exactly.
Yeah, any accessory structure, any accessory building over 500 square feet requires discretionary design review, like a detached garage.
Right, so it doesn't preclude somebody from building something that meets their needs. It just means that it doesn't get automatically green-lighted through the process
For ADUs.
For-
for
yeah, for
ADUs. Is that correct?
I apologize, I guess I'm not, not following you.
Well, so for example, if we put the limit back to 850, if somebody wants to build something that's 1,200 square feet, for example, how would they go about doing that?
Something what? Build what?
An ADU,
Larger.
an ADU-like structure on their
No,
property.
it's either an ADU or it's not an ADU. It's not an ADU-like structure.
So then it
it's
would
an
be-
accessory structure. If they wanted to build a 1,200 square foot workshop, they
Exactly.
would have to go through site and architectural review.
Exactly. So it doesn't preclude them from,
And then if they wanted to convert that, they'd have to go through a building permit process. So
Right.
it's a two-step process.
right.
So,
But
in short, the city
That's
can't
what you're
have
asking
any
me.
sort of discretionary review process or any process that requires a public hearing for approval of
ADU.
ADUs. So, and the city can't set a minimum size requirement that is less than 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet if it provides for more than one bedroom. So in terms of if the city set a different size limitation in R144, so instead of allowing for 1,200 square foot, which is the biggest,
Current standard.
but it's also the current standard. If we were to shrink that requirement, basically those projects would just not be allowed anymore. There wouldn't be any sort of variance procedure or some sort of public hearing option for people to seek. We want a bigger ADU than what the standard is. Those projects would just be denied
By whom?
As
by
an-
staff because it has to be a ministerial approval process without a public hearing.
Right, so they would be denied as an ADU, but they could still build a structure under the normal rules, under the normal building
They
code.
could, but it could never be converted to an ADU until we changed our code to allow that.
It sounds like we might need to push this off a little bit and have some more detailed discussion on this item.
Well, I'm wondering,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if-
To me, it sounds like you either continue with the current standard of 1,200 square feet ADU in the R144, because currently it's 1,000 in the R120, which again is consistent. The only place where the standard deviates from, our current standard deviates from the new allowances in the R144, which is we currently allow a 1,200 square foot ADU, which typically is, you know, 2-bedroom, whatever. So it sounds like what you know,
Well-
Councilmember LaBouvet thinks
I think
is
we're-
appropriate is to, you know, push that back down to 1,000.
Aren't we bigger in all three districts for the detached? So in R18, it's defined as 900, in R120, it's defined as 1,000, and in R144, it's defined.
Those are what the current standards are.
Right.
So
But
currently
but
it's,
those are not the state minimums. That's my point.
no. And my point was that these have been our current standards for a number of years. So
So how would you,
point was just to stick with those.
how would you implement and how would you go about this, since the approval of an ADU is basically ministerial? So I build my ADU, you approved it, and I don't go before the design commission or a city council. How will that approval process work?
The same way it works today. I provide a service to the building official to do a zoning review based on the objective standards. There's no discretion involved. Some cities have planners embedded in the building division. Some cities have their permit technicians do the zoning review. This city has the planner do the zoning review. So all building permits, regardless of whether it's for an ADU, for a single-family home, for a commercial building, all go through a zoning compliance review by somebody, because that's how we're able to then issue a building permit. All building permits must comply with the zoning in any jurisdiction. So that zoning review is done regardless.
I'm
So
not
I review
comfortable
for
with that
setback.
because the council member from Campbell told me they had to remove design requirements and any other requirements to the current code that they have.
Did they
I
have
would suggest that that
discretionary?
council person didn't know what they're talking about. I'm
Well-
sorry, but I also are in monthly meetings with the planning official of Campbell, and their accessory dwelling unit regulations pretty much reflect, or very similar. So you have to do a zoning review for a building permit, regardless of what it's for. And I don't think this new state legislation is saying anything goes. How are we going to know that it's 4 feet off the side or the rear property line? How are we going to know that it meets minimum 16 feet? We have to review the building permit applications, not only for building code, but also for zoning. Otherwise, the state wouldn't set these standards. How are we going to know that they meet them if some sort of review is not done? So it's basically an objective review. So,
All right.
So I think maybe another possibility, excuse me?
No, go ahead.
Oh, you know, so if we were to go to the state minimums and change our current standards, maybe we should allow for a period of resident feedback to see if that's a good idea or not. Is that something that we could do, is to basically kind of republish this standard with the state minimums and ask for some resident feedback, whether they think whether we should stick with the current standards, or if it's okay to ratchet down to the state, in light of the fact that, hey, any ADU, you could now, you know, enlarge it and go to with a junior ADU and, you know, allow triplexes on your property, and so.
I mean, in theory, yeah, we could do that.
may see a flood of 1,200 square foot ADUs come in on the R144s, because if they're thinking that those are gonna, so
Well,
it's
or
really.
And then
up-
separately, you
it's
know,
up
the
to you.
city is
Or they could
going
come
to
in and-
apply the state minimum, you know, it still has a duty to process these
Yeah.
ADU applications now, regardless of whether it has
And we look at them
a
relative
state
to
compliant
this.
ordinance in place.
What would the benefit be of reducing it to the state minimum? Just to be
Well,
streamlined and consistent?
Yeah,
or-
I think it's kind of consistency with the state policy, and the fact that the state is now mandating that you're allowed to, you know, have basically 2 ADUs plus your unit. So you essentially now have triplexes on a single residential lot. you know, you're already increasing density now by, you know, one more dwelling unit per lot. It seems, you know, we should stick with the minimums.
So all that would be, you know, it would be, you'd be looking at the 850 and 1,000. So it's really just lopping off 100 square feet in the R18, which isn't, you know, that's not a whole lot.
Okay?
And then the other difference would be in the R144.
R120 has a detached 1,000, so that
Well,
would go
that's the
down.
state minimum, if it's two-bedroom, if it's more than one bedroom.
Oh, but you also say detached 1,000 square foot with or without parking. So I agree, it should be, so you have stated in here, attached 850 or 1,000 if it's more than
More
one
than one
bedroom.
bedroom,
And
yeah.
then you have a line that says detached 1,000. So that would go down to 850, right?
So
It's 850.
can you,
Or the
Andrea, can you
1,000.
just put my computer up on the board here? So basically, as it's being described, is the thought here that it would just basically read. Because if there's no distinction between
Attached or detached.
attached or detached, we would just have one line
850.
that would just say
or
850 square
1,000
feet or 1,000 feet for an
bedroom.
accessory dwelling unit that provides more than one bedroom.
Yes, and then, but
All across the board.
that same language would be in the other zoning districts
Yes.
also.
All the same, yeah.
So,
The R18 is really just losing the 100 square feet for a detached that's one bedroom or less, and the R144 is going down to 1,000. So, you know, could be something the public could deal with.
but if a homeowner is building only one ADU, will his square footage change even? Instead of building two, a JADU and an ADU?
Yeah, this is what Councilmember LaBouvet is suggesting, is that it's consistent in each of the three zoning districts. And what I'm just pointing out to kind of help you guys understand whether or not homeowners are losing a lot than what they've previously been allowed. It's just 200 square feet in the R144 and 100 square feet. Because people will build more than one bedroom to get that 1,000 square feet, I'll guarantee you that.
So let me read to
They
you,
use it.
let me read to you this Californians for Home Ownership. It says, even if not subject to automatic approval, a city generally must approve any attached or detached ADU under 1,200 square feet unless the city adopts a new ADU ordinance setting local development standards for ADUs.
Yeah, I believe that this city has been implementing the state regulations consistent with the laws and what we put in our ordinance, regardless of what has been stated in that letter.
And I will say that, you know, in my opinion, the Californians for Home Ownership interpretation of the state laws is very aggressive and fairly pro-ADU development. So I'm not sure that I would say that I agree with everything that is stated in this letter in terms of their interpretation of what the state ADU law is.
And so I guess what staff is saying also, if it's the will of the council to modify those size limitations, it's certainly something that staff can implement and help homeowners understand.
I would feel more comfortable with the state minimums, and then if there's resident pushback, then we can certainly go back and amend again, so.
So do we have a motion to approve with those changes?
I think it would be a motion to amend.
To amend.
First would be a motion to amend to change it.
Right.
I've been pushing this, so I'll make that motion. So I'll make a motion to amend to the state minimums of 850 square feet and 1,000 square feet for a more than one bedroom accessory dwelling unit
For all zoning
For all zoning districts. Is that, I'm pretty sure that's what you
I
put
think
on
that's
the
what-
board,
Are
right?
we
That
going-
is what is on the board, is what is being proposed.
So are we going back to the citizens to ask them, or are we just doing it now?
Well, it sounds like that there's an urgency to pass something tonight. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that there's a strict urgency, but it's probably a good idea to have.
It's
You know,
preferable because
the
we have a
faster
lot of
we-
people calling.
The faster we have adopted standards, the easier it is for staff to administer the ADU program. And, you know, it's better for the city to have clearly adopted standards than relying on, you know, vague ambiguities in the state law that are susceptible to interpretation and having to debate applicants and the Californians for home ownership. So, yes, I would recommend adoption of some sort of standards.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second.
Yes, I have a motion by Councilmember LaBouvet and a second by Mayor Lawler for the amendment.
Oh, wait.
Okay, I have all votes in, and that passes 4-0. Let me show that to you.
I have a question before we get back to voting on the main bulk of this, and that is, I saw, Sergio, your comment about the homeowner people and some corrections that you wanted to make. Have those been implemented in the resolution we're looking at, or do we need to amend to make the changes you were recommending?
Based on the direction the council has provided in amending the ordinance, I have no further changes that I would suggest to this.
Okay, moving on. There's no unfinished business.
Well, no, we need to
Oh, I'm sorry.
I-
motion itself now.
Oh, sorry.
Certainly.
My head cold has got me. All right.
So you should be able to make the motion.
And I recommend that a motion be to introduce the ordinance by title only and waive first reading with the amendment that was voted on by council.
Okay, so I have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Luthold, a second by Mayor Lawler.
I don't have it on my screen.
That's just not coming up yet. There it goes.
Okay, all four votes are in. And it passes 4-0.
You know, I'm not sure that they have to read the title, but I think it'd probably be a good idea for the clerk to read the title.
So that would be an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Monte Sereno amending regulations for accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units.
I have a question. So will this take effect around March 2020 then?
It's adopted on February 4th.
Okay, so about March 4th. Yeah.
March 4th.
So any applications coming in after that date?
Okay.
All right. Ready to move on? New business. Item number 11, consider and adopt resolution modifying city's social media policy. Mr. Leonardis, do you have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. For council consideration this evening are proposed changes to the social media policy, which was adopted in August of 2019. In August of 2019, the previous 2016 Monte Sereno social media policy was rescinded by council and replaced with the current policy. The proposed changes before you this evening to the current policy are being recommended to clean up grammar, diction, correct a missing hyperlink, correct a link to the League of Cities Brown Act manual as referenced in the policy, as well as, in addition, there is a statement in the policy that claims this social media policy can be changed at any time. It is recommended that this sentence be changed to this social media policy can be changed at any time with a majority vote of the council. Also in consultation with our attorney, Mr. Rudin here, updates are suggested to minimize exposure to potential Brown Act violations with the current policy for our council members and commissioners. In order to avoid potential conflicts of interest in Brown Act violations, it is recommended council members consult and commissioners consult with the city manager's office before posting comments on city business and policies in their capacity as council members and commissioners. It is also recommended city council and commission members refrain from discussing city business, as those discussions can lead to a perception of bias among the public. This bias can ultimately lead to council or commission votes being challenged in court and subsequently overturned. Finally, commenting, emoting on others' postings by council members, city employees, or commissioners on city business topics and policies can be perceived as bias or a serial communication. These recommendations are not being brought forth to limit free speech by council members, employees, or commissioners on personal business or personal social media use for non-city business topics. And we have three choices in the staff report under the options column, which are amend the current policy as recommended by staff, or excuse me, adopt, the red line staff recommendations, amend the red line staff recommendations in this report and adopt those amendments, or provide no changes to the City of Monte Sereno social media policy at this time. And that concludes this report.
All right, thank you.
Questions?
Any questions? Councilmember Turner, do you have any questions?
I have a comment, not necessarily a question. There was a resolution that we had before any of us were on the council, and that's Resolution 3612. It was signed by Mayor Lionel Allen, April 2016, April 5th. And I wanted to see if the city manager could take a look at this resolution and incorporate some of it, because I think there are merits to, for example, the content guidelines that we have in there that we don't have in our current social media policy. So that's my comment.
Certainly, that is a possibility as one of the options in the staff report, should the council receive a majority vote to amend the policy this evening.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Any member of the public wishing to speak on this item? None. Do we have a motion and/or discussion?
I've got some significant discussion on this, if I may. So first of all, I've expressed my displeasure about this blatant attempt to muzzle the council's First Amendment rights. And I think it was, in my opinion, completely out of line to bring this forward in this way. Now, it does bring it forward and we can discuss it, but we had an ad hoc committee last year. The ad hoc committee developed guidelines. There was some suggestion at some point from our new council that at some point we could revisit this and perhaps improve. And I believe the appropriate thing to have done would have been to bring that to our attention and perhaps bring the ad hoc committee back, myself and Mayor Turner, to, Mayor Lawler, to address this issue with council and to come up with a policy. Trying to impose this and then to ask us to potentially rewrite it in the council meeting, I think is completely inappropriate. If we are going to rewrite it, we can go through and we can take the red line and take items out line by line. We've had comments from prior council members prior Mayor Standing and prior Mayor Allen, that this appeared to them to be completely inappropriate in an attempt to stifle the speech that our constituents have asked us to engage in. So bringing things to the city manager before we publish them, no way. That's not what we do. That's not what Rishi Kumar really set the example for everyone when he went and took the issue of water and ran with it to the public. That's what we need to do here. So this policy, these changes, other than the technical changes to the front, need to be essentially removed in their entirety and go back. Even the warnings, the intention of the original social media policy was to warn of possible Brown Act violations, but if someone engages in a Brown Act violation, that's on them. We've all been educated in that, and that's something that we need to pay attention to. If we can provide a better warning, that's great, but not police people's speech in advance of that speech. So my recommendation would be that we revive the ad hoc committee, and that if we go with the ad hoc committee we had before, we work with council on language that will meet the spirit that we were aiming for originally, which is maximize communication, not control communication.
I have a question, and I wasn't part of that ad hoc committee, and I did read this document, but, you know, I'm not able to sort of connect the dots here. So when I look at this red line, to me, the only kind of significant paragraph that was added was paragraph 4, I think this is red line to be, or no, I guess there's an addition to paragraph 3 that adds a trolling statement.
There's
And this-
paragraph 3, which says, before engaging, council members should consult with the city manager.
Well, we had that same piece of code
No.
before.
Nothing like that.
We did have a, and it's a should consult with city manager, which is discretionary, right? And I think that's primarily to avoid Brown Act violations.
Well,
But I'm trying to find that spot, but I could have sworn that there was something in the original policy that had
no,
to do with.
the original policy said city council members are invited to actively maintain a
What
Brown
page
Act
are you on?
buddy. This is on, it's item 3 of the social media policy for council members, commissioners.
7, I think, page 7.
Numbering? 9. 9 of 11. On the. The original language is redlined out. City council members are invited to actively maintain a Brown Act buddy list, and which may include notations about which members are communicating on particular controversial subjects. Such document may be managed as a shared Google document. That's putting the impetus on the council members and the Brown Act buddy system for us to take care of things ourselves, not to clear it with someone who would potentially have an opinion about what we should or should not say. Should is not a very discretionary word. It can be argued that it is discretionary or is not discretionary. Should's close to shall, which is generally not considered discretionary. So that's.
Is there something that we can modify that piece? I understand kind of what your concern is.
Yeah, my
that.
concern is no one can tell anyone in advance what they can or cannot say. We're talking about transparency. We're talking about greater presence on social media. There should be nothing telling us what we can and can't do. And under the law, under free speech, no one tells you what you can and cannot do. You may be in trouble for it once you do it. So if we're going to be putting guidelines out, the guidelines about what we do or say need to be recommendations at most, and they certainly need to not be something that a city council member would get in trouble for violating. So that was, these are huge changes that we're looking at being proposed here. They are a complete shift and going very much against the spirit of more communication and more transparency, even down to the one that was intended to touch on the Brown Act concern. It needs a lot more careful consideration, because what it says under the new item 5 is commissioners and council members should be mindful of due process concerns regarding matters that have the potential to become for the council or commissions. That may be fine, but publicly commenting on such items, regardless of whether it is in a personal or official capacity, may substantially require their recusal or non-participation in any related decision. That's telling the public that if they suspect something is problematic, that they can come in here and demand recusal because they saw somebody post something that they believe said something on Nextdoor. It's the exact opposite of what goes on. So you're allowed to have opinions about an issue and talk about those in public. You have to keep an open mind. You have to be careful not to violate the Brown Act. But this suggestion that having an opinion may substantially require recusal or non-participation is just way over the line. And again, it's the exact opposite of the spirit of providing guidance. This is the type of thing that we were trying to protect against with the ad hoc committee, because as we had with prior city attorneys, if you ask the city attorney, should I go and post this? They will always say, I'd rather you didn't. The question is, do you want to go and post it? We need some very basic guidelines that encourage public participation by council members and suggest how we can keep safe. So that's my point on this. I will be moving that we table this and reconvene the ad hoc committee to address the issue with council and come up with something that I think we could be proud to show our citizens are promoting transparency and communication.
So I'm just trying to understand, because when I read this, it didn't alarm me nearly as much as it is alarming you. So this looks like a statement of sort of fact, right? Commissioners and council members should be mindful of due process concerns regarding matters that have
That
potential.
first sentence may be. The
Okay.
second sentence
Then
is
publicly-
extremely problematic because it invites the member of the public who believes they have seen any communication to come in and demand recusal or non-participation in a related discussion later.
So maybe Sergio, you can weigh in on this second sentence, because I kind of thought this was also sort of somehow related to the Brown Act.
So, this is, I think the key word here is may subsequently require, not must. You know, again, if someone is coming before the council and on a manner where they're entitled to procedural due process, you know, they're entitled to an unbiased decision maker, in theory. And so, you know, it's, you know, from my perspective, it would be my strong recommendation that council members, you know, when you are going to be considering a specific project or, you know, a particular license or permit, I mean, the city doesn't issue too many, you know, licenses or is like revoking a permit. And so someone has the opportunity for, you know, notice and hearing, that, you know, council members, you know, try to avoid publicly stating their opinions on the record before, you know, the particular person has the opportunity to be heard. You know, I think in terms of legislative matters, you know, where the council's not acting like a, you know, a decision maker on someone's rights, but rather, you know, trying to make new legislation, certainly due process considerations are not as big of an issue. So, you know, when you're trying to figure out what the law should be, you have considerably more, you know, leeway in terms of engaging with the public, gauging public opinion, informing the public of your own personal opinion, and, you know, lobbying for your own position, but, you know, when you're trying to figure out how the law should be applied, i.e. the city already has an ordinance and you're applying it to a particular person or a particular property or set of facts, then, you know, due process issues come into effect. So that, I think, is the concern about that particular sentence. And again, you know, a lot of this is more suggestions at this point. It's obviously not the city council's policy.
So I mean, for me, when I read this language, it just reminded me of some of the language that I read in the Brown Act book. And so I wasn't alarmed by it, but is there an interpretation to this that do you see the point of, does
And
this somehow muzzle?
To be fair, I think some of this is actually taken either out or similar to language already in the council's document that was on the consent calendar, the City Council Code of Ethics. So some of this language is intended to mirror those types of requirements that are already addressed in that document. So, you know, certainly I take Councilmember Luthold's comments under advisement. That is all.
So, yeah, sorry, if I may, just to address one more of that issue. There was a very subtle discussion that was just had here that touched on two different issues and two completely different standards. One, when there is a due process consideration, and when there is a legislative type of action. The process and the effect need to be parsed on those. And so again, if we are going to advise and train the council and make suggestions as to what best practices are, it splits between maybe in a due process environment where a permit for a specific property is being discussed, it would be advisable not to express opinions, or you might have to recuse yourself. Whereas that still, I'm concerned about the language here, again, inviting a member of the public, and we have several who read things very, very carefully, who would then feel that having a discussion that you took to the public could maybe trigger the need for recusal or something. So again, you put the word recusal out here, you're inviting a problem where the goal of the social media policy is to help guide people the right direction. But for example, I think we need to get out there and put these things before the public. Even this social media policy is an example. The public had 5 days that this was out there. We've gotten 2 public comments from people who are in the know, who were immediately concerned when they saw this and saw it. This was a word I picked up from them, not them from me, muzzling the council potentially. So it needs work. It needs more work to help guide future council members as to how to stay out of trouble, as it is recommended you might want to do the following in a due process. You might want to do something different in a legislative capacity. And it needs to certainly not invite the public to say, oh, I heard a council member on next door mention that there's a project on Highway 9, I'm requiring their recusal. Just because they brought it up, because the word recusal is in here, they're not even supposed to be on the social media mentioning it. That's the opposite of what we want. We want council members out there so that we don't have the city account that doesn't allow comments being the only communications with our citizens. So I think, again, this needs work. I've volunteered to do it the first time. I was looking forward to doing it the second time when there was an invitation that we might want to review and revisit, because this is what I love. And I'm sure that Mayor Lawler, I would hope she would be interested in doing this. She did a great job working with me before on this. If not, Councilmember Elahi's a lawyer. This is what we do. We parse words. But I'm extremely concerned about anything that turns upside down the idea of more communication with our citizens, and this does that. Sorry to go on so long.
Thank you. No, that's okay. That's okay. It's your prerogative. As far as this is concerned, I mean, to be honest with you, I think as elected officials, we have to hold ourselves to a high standard of behavior. And I feel like these edits, these amendments are clarifying exactly what that behavior is. And I think it's important that we post responsibly. And I think it's important that we have a filter through which we can make sure that what we want to convey isn't going to get us in trouble. So I see it more as an opportunity to protect council members and commissioners from making a mistake, as well as holding ourselves accountable for good behavior. So that's where I'm coming from. So I don't have an issue with these edits. I think that they, if anything, strengthen and make it clear about how we should conduct ourselves on social media. That's my 2 cents. So moving forward, any.
So, I mean, if Councilmember Turner had comments, otherwise I was going to make an amendment. I was going to make a motion that we table this, revive the ad hoc committee, and do it right. Second.
Do you have more comments?
No, but I don't have a second either.
Well, I don't think we should make it.
Sorry,
when
we
the-
shouldn't do it without Javed being here as well.
I think this was not supposed to be a contentious item, right? So, I don't, in the spirit of non-contentiousness, like, Mayor Lawler, are you willing to revive the ad hoc committee? Is that something that you would want to sign up for and just go through word by word?
Well, I think what's been covered in here is pretty much what we need to have in terms of, I'm not sure reviving the ad hoc committee is going to get us to a better place, other than just changing a few words. I mean, I think it's very important that we are clear on what we can and cannot do.
I'm sorry, I agree with you completely, and I think we could do that. And you and I could do that as the ad hoc committee from before. The spirit of help provide better guidance, I agree with completely. This language doesn't get us there. It needs some tweaking, it needs some work. I think we heard that from the city attorney, that he could provide more tweaks and input if we work on that.
Perhaps if Mr. Rudin could provide us with some suggested wording, then we could potentially move forward with.
Is this something we can do tonight?
It could be. It just sounds, it depends on how long we would like to be here tonight.
Well, I think if you just address the items that you want to change.
I think what you just said in terms of code of conduct is something that I would advocate. I think we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and we need to speak truthfully. So, I would recommend that we change whatever paragraph you're not comfortable with in this version here.
Well, again, I strongly recommend, as a lawyer and as a council member who wants to do things right, not keep revisiting them and doing them over again, that we not edit things in the middle of a council meeting. If that is the will of the council, you don't want to wait for Javed, you want to shove this down our throats tonight and make us edit it on the spot and ask an attorney to make edits on the spot, we can do this one by one. I think it's the wrong thing to do. There is no urgency to this. I think that we owe it to our fellow council member to have him here, and I think to do this right. The question between a due process consideration versus a legislative consideration, we need to parse this into two separate suggested paragraphs, perhaps even with examples that are explanatory. I always love an example which says, for example, if someone is applying for a permit, for example, if we're looking at working with something general like a general plan. And provide those examples, provide that help for people. So again, editing it on the spot, if you insist that we do that, I have one place that I'm going to take this, which is public, because the public has not even heard about this. This was over Martin Luther King weekend. We've had comments from the two people who were on the council previously, two former mayors, who said they were concerned about this and wanted to weigh in on it. No one else is even aware of it. Next door isn't aware of the fact that there are proposals to seriously limit the way council members interact. So I think we need to do it right, and that's my recommendation. I'd look to my fellow council members to do that. I'm volunteer to help do it right, and ultimately, the guidance that I'm hearing, which is hold ourselves to higher standards, avoid any appearance of impropriety or doing things wrong. Let's build that in here, but let's do it respectful of the First Amendment. Let's do it respectful of more communications, not less.
I'm sorry, so let me just go one more time. So on this paragraph 5, I understand this sentence number 2 that you don't like, and now I can appreciate your concern on this whole recusal thing. If we strike that sentence, I think that I would be okay with that piece, but I'm still not connecting trolling with sort of this gag or muzzling effect, because I don't really see it. I mean, some of these things just look very common sense to me. So where's the muzzle come from?
Okay, so I would comment on these things. First of all, we have a code of ethics which prohibits this discord and intentionally speaking out. We don't need to bring it in here, and I don't think anyone's ever been accused of trolling.
But what language in here is muzzling?
So hold on. So let's go through item by item. Paragraph 3 says before engaging should consult with the city manager. No, paragraph 3 out completely. Nobody says you got to go to Terry, you got to go to Steve before you can go and talk about stuff. No. And we
Mayor,
are elected officials.
Mr. Leonardis?
If I may chime in on that, the purpose of adding that policy was so that not all 5 council members go at one time on one subject and create a meeting online where the public is extensively commenting and you essentially have an unnoticed meeting online. In other words, there was no pecking order that says a particular council member could go first or second. And once you have more than 2, then the others are excluded from the discussion. And that's why it was before engaging, find out from the city manager if any other council member, the process would be as if somebody had approached the city manager first and said, hey, I want to comment on this topic. Then the city manager would know if others were about to post or comment, and that would prevent an unnoticed meeting online with extensive discussion. So it was just a protection to avoid a Brown Act violation, but not an intention to how could I say it, stifle free speech.
But anything.
So can there be wording in there that would specifically say to make sure you aren't posting on the same topic?
No, because this,
I mean, clear.
yeah, no, I got to jump in here. Free speech. Any one of us can go on Nextdoor anytime we want and put up a post.
Yeah,
No one can say before posting, do this.
I don't see it as that. I see it as just making sure that you're not posting the same thing I'm posting at the same time. I think it's more about, it's not about, you still have absolutely every right to post what you want. It's just having that extra set of eyes to make sure that, oh, by the way, so-and-so already wanted to post something about that.
Can
It's
we
more
make
about-
a one-word change there instead of saying should consult, should inform?
Or maybe even before initiating or engaging in a discussion online regarding city business, city council members should be cautious of serial discussions, right? I think that's what we're trying to get at. We don't want to have serial discussions.
And should
Why can't we just
inform
make it
the city
self-policing?
manager.
But that's exactly what I want. I want it self-policing. I
So why
don't
don't-
want, go check with daddy.
So I think what you're objecting to is the consult with city
city
manager to
manager.
help prevent, right? If we
Yeah.
take those words out and say, be cautious of,
And that's exactly how I want to rewrite it and bring it back to the council.
Well, would
So,
it be,
So, I mean, those are very good word choices. That's essentially what we had in the original, was city council should be very aware of these issues. City council should work with their Brown Act buddies.
but I think
So-
that, I mean, the Brown Act buddy thing was very
That's-
cumbersome.
yeah,
That
I
didn't-
think
that didn't
that
really
was
work out,
problematic.
right?
I
So
think the
Kirsten would
problem
like
with
to
that
hear-
is if two council members post on next door, then it prohibits everybody else from saying anything.
That, it may not. And that's another point
And-
here, which is, I mean,
And therefore, we're constantly under attack, and we can't say anything because there are two council members who have already said their piece. So I think what we're looking for is a way in which if you're going to express your point of view, right, that we all have the same opportunity to do that, and that you can't say you can't do that because now you're in violation of the Brown Act.
so this comes down to the whole question of free speech in general. Any of us, all five of us, could write letters to the editor, and that's not going to violate the Brown Act. All five of us can go on next door.
Is that
And-
true?
You know, and I have provided the council with opinions on how the Brown Act interacts with electronic communication. I have done that confidentially. What I will say at this point is it's not entirely clear that, there was a bill introduced to specifically exempt electronic communications, participation in discussions on Facebook from restrictions in the Brown Act, and that bill did not go anywhere. There have been opinions of the Attorney General suggesting that, email electronic communications can form a, can be a prohibited meaning under the Brown Act. The AG has not, at this point, as far as I know, opined on use of Nextdoor or Facebook or other social media, but presumably the analysis would be the same. So yes, there is the potential that if three council members are interacting on the same post on Facebook, that would be a Brown Act violation.
Interacting on the same post. And that's what
And
we're
if
already
they're
aware of.
interacting on the same page, that's not clear how that would work either,
Right,
you
and
know?
So if two council members posted on a topic coming up for discussion separately,
At,
the same topic.
although you said that if you're doing something in a public forum, then it's by definition public, and therefore some of these things don't apply. It's a
so
gray area, right?
The only saving grace, the only argument that you could make is that, the idea of the Brown Act is it is a sunshine law, is, to make sure that the public are informed and have the opportunity to participate, and that, council members aren't making secret laws. So if you're doing it on Facebook, in theory, you're doing it in front of the public, but also not everybody is digitally connected. That's, I think, something else to think about. The Brown Act is there to a certain degree to ensure equal access, and there are communities in California that don't have the same level of connection that Monte Sereno does. So we have to also, be mindful of that in our interpretations of what the state law is.
And I think that's what's nice about this policy is that we did make it so that it could be changed at any time. And so given how things change quickly with social media, that having that kind of flexibility to go in and amend it from time to time is important. And I think that was something that we came up with before. My take is that I would find, I would prefer if I were to make a post that I would run it by either the city manager or the city attorney to make sure I wasn't going to get myself in trouble. So that's just something for me to help me post responsibly and behave appropriately. So that's it's set up to guide us in a way that ultimately we probably won't need that guidance once we get used to it. But I'd like to see something that gives us that guidance.
Sure, and I would suggest that, and I think we may have had some language in initially, we may have removed it, or it may be somewhere else, that said, in the event that you have any question about what you're posting, it would be recommended that you run it by the city attorney before posting if you think that it's controversial.
I think that's the last paragraph, actually, of the
Right,
policy.
Right, I mean, and so it is recommended that if you wish to do so, yeah, if there is any concern, the council members should exercise discretion, follow suggestions above, and/or check with the city manager or city attorney. So again, this is the should. You're still free to screw up if you wish. I mean, that's the beauty of this United States. But I liked the issue here. The other thing that I want to point out here is, I know that this comes about a bit emotionally because of some of the stuff that happened on Nextdoor in recent history. But I think on Nextdoor, even in the controversial subjects that have been talked about in recent history, there wasn't any discussion that was really engaged in online. What there were invitations for people to come to council meetings and speak about topics that they might care about and that they might have opinions about. And again, that's something where each and every one of us, and this was a concern we had, are you going to go claim a topic by being first to post on Nextdoor? We're not posting opinions about how we feel about something or how we wish to vote. For the most part, we are inviting the public to come because there's an issue that the public probably cares about. So I would say in that sense, all 5 of us could post anytime. We should certainly be careful within any individual post about thanks and the emoticons and about commenting within someone else's post because it might start to smell like a meeting. But simply saying, this is an issue that the public may want to weigh in on, the meeting's at 7 p.m., if you have opinions, be sure to come. That's the kind of thing that we've been
But I
doing
wish it were
online.
that simple. It was about the meeting that will occur at 5 p.m. Some of the posts were actually pretty controversial and difficult for any of the council members to add on to it because there were already 2 people. And so we didn't want to go in there and risk being accused of violating the Brown Act.
So these are things that we need to deal with. We need guidance to help people
To
with
be
it.
clear, it's paragraph 3 that you take issue with.
Paragraph 3 is...
The rest of it is,
Well, paragraph 3 is, should be either removed completely or modified as
Can I-
Councilmember Labouvet was suggesting, which is, should exercise caution when posting.
or can I suggest, before initiating or engaging in a discussion online regarding city business, council members are recommended to consult with the city manager or city attorney, or it is recommended to consult with the city manager or attorney.
Well, we
Recommended.
already have that recommendation in
Yeah.
paragraph 6, so why don't we just make it be cautious of serial discussions?
Yeah.
And then I think that kind of removes the objection, right? To me, then this becomes a boilerplate, hey, don't violate.
And Andrea, can you put my computer up?
Yeah, that's,
But, would you,
we're going to
Sean?
write it on the
That
spot.
If we're gonna do it, then
I-
we
I-
might as well
do
have
it.
it.
I mean, so, okay, so
What is
for
that?
me, I didn't know that this was going to blow up into a big thing because I thought that we were just benefiting from Mr. Lenardi's experience from Los Gatos, and I thought that these were just sort of came out of the Los Gatos code.
Los Gatos council members don't comment online because their city attorney has told them, don't do it. And that's what we're trying to be different. We don't want to integrate with Los Gatos. We want to
But-
stand up as Monte Sereno.
But I mean, the way I read this is
It's a
that
joke.
I don't feel precluded from any commenting that I would have done before.
Right. I don't
Yeah.
either.
Well, I see it as violating a code if you don't consult when it says should consult with. So I like
Okay,
your
all right,
change.
How
let's-
can you
let's
con-
change- let's
change
change
the
that.
word
Let's change
should?
it.
Let's change that one.
It's suggested to consult. It's a
Well,
Or
no,
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 let's-
no. I like Dan's, which
yeah, let's
was
be-
just be cautious.
Be cautious of serial, because we already have the consult in paragraph 6.
Yeah.
that if we have any concerns whatsoever in paragraph 6, says check with city manager or city attorney before posting.
Okay, well, if that,
So I think that,
Satisfies.
Cautious,
I think-
should be cautious to help prevent serial discussions.
yeah,
good. And then I think the other one that you're taking objection to is the second in paragraph 5, starting with publicly.
Well, so I have a problem with the second half of paragraph 4. Because I think that it, again, creates a problem that it didn't need to, which was, so it starts with trolling, and is prohibited, that's probably fine. But then thanking or liking or other emoting on inflammatory posts by others in one's capacity as council member, employee, or commissioner is not permitted in reference to city business policy or personnel decisions. That just kind of slips into this paragraph here. There's a lot in there to unpack.
That
It
sounds
makes-
common
makes-
sense
it
to me.
makes
Yeah,
common
that's-
sense to
that's-
me. 'Cause
And that if
you
somebody
like
says
it,
something
then
sort of
you're communicating.
inflammatory, that I shouldn't go like it, because that's,
Exactly.
Right,
that's
I
the
mean-
same thing
I
as
mean,
me
that makes
saying
perfect
that
sense.
myself, right?
But,
So-
but this is requiring you to know what's an inflammatory post.
Well, I
And
think
we
you
may
would
all
know.
have different opinions about what's inflammatory versus what's not. And again, you're setting up for being punished for your personal misdetermination about whether the post was inflammatory or not. Maybe I didn't think it was inflammatory that the police commissioner did something and I went and hit thank you on it, but somebody else felt that was an inflammatory post. So there's a discretion that is in here, again, where we're putting a policy that somebody can be censured for, somebody can be taken to task for here. And so my concern is, I like the idea that was trying to be pointed out to us, which is thanking or liking or other emoting may be equivalent to well, no, it may be equivalent to a comment. And so it's
equivalent to a comment, yeah.
it is equivalent to a comment, and therefore do it with extreme caution. Now, again, it's the inflammatory posts here. Maybe it's meaningless because inflammatory is up to the viewer's discretion.
We had something
We can
like
remove
that.
the word inflammatory and just leave posts, emoting on posts by others in one's capacity as council member, employee, or commissioner is not permitted in reference to city business policy or personnel decisions.
All right,
No, I'd prefer to leave inflammatory in, because, I mean, if that's gonna be the case. No, the point isn't that I wanna remove the word inflammatory and make it so that everybody's in trouble for every time that their finger hits one of those emoticons on Nextdoor, which, by the way, a lot of the emoticons on Nextdoor are when you're scrolling, they will randomly hit. And so you have to pay careful attention to that. And again, so now we're in trouble for scrolling past something and hitting the little heart button as you scroll. So, I mean, I think the point is, and the other thing about this, it says permitted in reference to city business policy or personnel. That's fine. We're not supposed to be doing any of those things anyway. City business.
Well, if we're not, then what's the harm in putting them here?
point then.
The point is, we don't need to put something in here that's completely extraneous that then we get in trouble because somebody interprets it. Again, like I say, we have citizens who love to interpret these things and then come in here and put people to task for, I don't think you did this right in this meeting or in this public comment that you made. So why invite that? Trolling is not allowed. Thanking or liking is not recommended, as it can be interpreted as a comment.
Or highly
Or,
discouraged.
Highly
or it could
discouraged.
be interpreted as an inflammatory
Thanking
post.
or liking or other emoting on posts by others, et cetera, is highly discouraged.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
I thought that we had liking somewhere else in this policy. Is that, do you recall where that
Next
is?
sentence.
Okay, there
Where-
it is.
where's the next sentence?
Right, be aware that comments on
Another post.
I want to also illustrate that this policy is directed towards commissioners and employees, which are under the jurisdiction of the city manager, the staff, and we have to also look out for their behavior online as well.
Liking.
So going back to paragraph 3 then, you would want employees to consult with the city manager prior to posting?
Well, what,
Employees are covered in the first half of
Okay.
the whole section, I believe.
Okay.
I mean, in the first half of the
Get my
entire policy.
binoculars
That's a
out.
different
Is that-
section.
so did we capture a modification to Sean's approval of 3?
What did we end up with?
So what I understand the council to have discussed in terms of direction on this policy is language saying, before initiating or engaging discussion online regarding city business, council members should be cautious of serial discussions and/or creating an unnoticed public meeting. Let's put a slash in there.
All right.
And then paragraph 3,
And then when we,
4.
Paragraph 4, thinking or liking or other emoting on posts by others is highly discouraged, period.
Okay. And then
And then on number
paragraph
5,
5,
the first sentence was okay.
it's the sentence starting with publicly, right? You want to
Right.
get rid of that sentence. Publicly commenting on items
No,
regardless.
I think we just need to remove everything from there out. We're aware that it could create problems.
Well, I think that this last sentence
This last sentence is good.
just a-
Comments made by
is just a
councilmen.
Brown, is just a
it's
Brown Act thing, right?
But again, we
But
don't
it's
want
a-
to invite people. The one that says comments made by council in advance of a public hearing may be used as evidence of bias to reverse the council's decision.
I
But
think
that,
that's just a
invitation-
gentle.
That's true.
I think it's a gentle reminder to us, though, is
I-
it not?
The original language could also serve that purpose, which was the council members, commissioner posting should remain objective, unbiased, indicate they're maintaining an open mind, and will make a final decision after a formal notice meeting.
I like that so much better because it's a
Alright.
positive
So
statement.
strike,
so we're going to revert
Just-
back to
just sta-
item 5?
keep the one, just the one sentence.
Yeah, why don't we keep, well, we'll keep the red line sentence at the beginning of that that's been crossed out and clean up the language in there. And then the next sentence, and then strike everything from publicly.
And then we're down to capitalization.
Yep.
So
I
We
approve,
hashed it out.
See,
not,
we could do it.
Yeah.
wasn't that bad?
All right,
Okay.
then, so do we have,
But, so are there, but is there still a reason for the ad hoc committee to come back to adopt any additional
I don't think so, I think if we
pieces?
looked it out.
Like from the previous resolution, is that something you guys want to take a look at?
I don't think it's necessary. I'll take a look at this because, just on my own and bring it back to council later on if I have some additional suggestions for improvements. As I mentioned, I'm a big fan of giving an example. And so the example of what's due process versus what's not. I might come back later on with some suggestions if I can do that, but we don't necessarily need a committee.
Could you take a look at the resolution 3612 that Councilmember Ann Standing, Craig Huff, and Mayor Allen did prior to our changing our social media policy? Because I think there are some merits in there that
Yeah.
we should look at.
I'll be happy to look at that and maybe, like I say, come back at a later meeting with some proposals that, if it looks appropriate, because I think you may be right. And
Yeah.
there may be some other improvements that we can do, and I could work with council on that to, again, just make it easier for everybody to understand.
Yeah, so you're going to work together, both of you, right?
Do we want to add, do you still want to work with me?
Yeah,
Liz?
of course, of course. I mean, if that's going to make sense, we could do that.
Yeah, I like to have another person
Of
to
course,
bounce things
happy
off.
to.
of. Okay.
Then, moving on, do we have
Are we done?
A motion
a
to,
motion to approve,
The
to
amended language.
amend, to approve the amendments to the,
To approve as amended.
to approve the social media policy as amended?
Yes.
And so the motion would be to adopt the resolution adopting a social media policy as amended with the following amendments. Is this page 8 of 9? Paragraph 3 would read, before initiating or engaging in a discussion online regarding city business, council members should be cautious of zero meetings and/or creating an unnoticed public meeting. paragraph 4 would have the last sentence revised, thanking or liking or other emoting on posts by others is highly discouraged. Subsequent paragraph 5, the prior language in the city council policy would be restored to read, when posting about a topic that is controversial or coming before the council commission, the council member / commissioner posting should remain objective, unbiased, and indicate they are maintaining an open mind and will make a final decision after a formal notice meeting. Commissioners and council members should be mindful of due process concerns regarding matters that have potential to come before the council or commissions, and it would strike the following 2 suggested sentences. And I think those are all of the amendments that are proposed.
So do we have a motion to approve?
Yes.
I'm going to let Sean second because
I wasn't going to second
Oh, yeah, why
that.
don't you make the motion?
come on, you did all
Go
the
ahead, make
edits.
the motion.
I don't have a second on that.
Okay. You don't want to?
No.
Because it shouldn't be controversial anymore. Okay.
A motion by Councilmember Turner and a second by Councilmember LaBouvet.
Aw.
You should be able to vote. I have all votes in. It passes 4-0.
Thank
At
you.
least I gave you a yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this tonight.
All right, moving on.
Get one more thing off our plate.
Item 12, discussion and direction on Site and Architecture Commission expansion of duties. Mr. Leonardis, staff report.
Thank you. Ms. Hamilton, were you going to be handling this one this evening?
I wasn't prepared to, but I
Or Mr. Rudin, would you be handling this one?
I think I will be handling it with the wonderful planning director.
Okay.
Let me pull up the staff report really quickly so that I can go over some of the.
I can start out. So this, a while back, there was I think it was back in summer, a resolution adopted which directed staff to prepare recommendations and associated documents to expand the duties of the current Site and Architectural Commission, and possibly include them as a recommending body on zoning changes, general plan amendments, subdivisions, variances, and permits, plan development permits. You know, looking at kind of the expansion of that, it really puts them in a position of being a planning commission, which is a pretty significant change. And whether or not, I think that's in the context of this city and their land use issues and whatnot, is really prudent, necessary. Additionally, you know, what does the Site and Architectural Commission think of it? You know, what are, is it going to accomplish what the council intended it to do, or is it going to create a commission that really doesn't do much other than what they've been doing to date? So I think, you know, one of the questions is to really discuss the issues behind this direction again, maybe even possibly consult with the Site and Architectural Commission. I think clearly there's some opportunities to increase public outreach or create a public outreach policy, which, you know, could potentially, I think, capture some of the desires of the council when it makes sense. So I think, you know, this report, albeit we had that resolution adopted in August, you know, further thinking it through, we wanted to bring it back to council to see what are you thinking today, and what is the best way to go about really diving into that whole direction, and what are the real implications of doing that? What are the time implications? What are the cost implications? It's not just a name change. It's a whole education process. It's a whole, it's taking you out of the loop as the planning agency and putting them in. You can't just make them a recommending body per se and not call them a planning commission. If they're really dealing with the land use issues in a recommending capacity, they really are starting to act like the planning commission and should maybe take over some of the decision-making. So again, I think really kind of diving into that whole, what does that direction mean?
And, in part, most of having a lot of these matters go to the Site and Architecture Commission for review and recommendation on general plan amendments, zone changes, subdivisions, plan development permits, variances. Certainly, that's something that the council can require, but we would make it by ordinance. So before I start putting together the ordinance to do this, I had a number of questions in terms of what the council was desiring. First, I went back through and listened to the tapes related to this. There are some ambiguities in the language of the resolution. So, for example, first issue is the council wants the Site and Architecture Commission to provide recommendations on zone changes. Does that mean just when a property changes from one zone to a different zone, like rezoning? Or does that mean every time there's an amendment to the city's zoning code, you would like that to go to the Site and Architecture Commission for study and review? Secondly, I assume that the council, when they want recommendations on these things, would like them to happen in front of the Site and Architecture Commission as part of a notice public meeting. Well, if the city had a planning commission, the state law prescribes a very particular process by which you have to provide notice, to whom you have to provide notice, how far in advance you have to provide notice. And it also, sort of prescribes the scope of, what kind of recommendation your planning commission provides. Before you can change a zoning ordinance, if you have a more formal planning commission that's not just somebody who's providing a recommendation, they have to study the subject, and basically the city council can't, make changes to zoning ordinances without having your planning agency provide, have the opportunity for study and input, basically. So if you had a planning commission, it would be very different in terms of, if the council gets a land use ordinance in front of them and, they have some new idea, well, you would stop, you wouldn't have a reading of the ordinance, it would go back to your planning agency for study. Now, that might be something that you guys want, it might be something that you definitely don't want. It's sort of, up to you guys how far the scope of that is. However, if you do have a planning body, it's beneficial from my perspective as the city attorney, because the law is very clear as to what happens when you have a separate planning agency and a city council and the process you're supposed to follow. It's a lot more ambiguous when you have, or actually, it's not perfectly clear as to what it is when you are the planning agency, but yet you're sort of delegating some sort of other responsibility to provide recommendations to another Brown Act body. So, there would be some benefits in terms of having a clear process that is clearly compliant with state law to go and create effectively a planning commission or a planning agency. On the other hand, there would be some delays in terms of the process by which the city does things, such as approving, new subdivisions, such as approving zone changes, ordinances, variances. And so that I think is, some of the questions that, your attorney has for you in terms of what direction does the council really want to go in. And then I think specifically there was a number of bullet point questions that hopefully we would address in terms of preparing an ordinance for the council's consideration. And these are on the bottom of page 3 of the staff report.
And page 4.
Yeah, and top of page 4. So basically, you know, if you're having the Site and Architecture Commission provide recommendations on essentially every land use matter in the city, do you still want to call it the Site and Architectural Commission? Do you want to formally designate it as the city's planning agencies? You know, and basically create a planning commission. Another one is, does the council want to designate the Site and Architectural Commission as the city's advisory agency for the purpose of the Subdivision Map Act? And so that would have some implications in terms of the timelines by which the council has to process tentative maps. Right now, the city code says the city council is its own advisory agency, which is a little strange. There's no requirement in the Subdivision Map Act that we have an advisory agency. I suppose the city code designates that to make it clear who is the approval authority, but in the absence of that provision, it would have been the council anyway. But the city council can have the Site and Architecture Commission as its advisory agency. It can, if it wants to, but doesn't have to, also have the Site and Architecture Commission be the body that approves tentative maps. That's certainly an option. And then I guess another question was, you know, does the council want to have a joint study session with the Site and Architecture Commission to see how they feel about additional responsibilities, whether they would be willing to stay on the Site and Architecture Commission if they were required to do all of that? And then my last question, I think I brought up at the beginning of this, which was, you know, do you want to have them also provide opinions on your zoning ordinances?
Right?
So that's a lot of questions.
I have a question for you. For other cities, their planning commission or the planning agency, are they employees of the city, or are they all volunteers?
No,
Most of them are not.
appointed, many of them are appointed bodies. Most of them are appointed bodies, the planning
Okay.
commission. They're
Okay.
appointed by the council.
In rare circumstances, they may even be elected.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Well, it's not a question, just more discussion. Is this a public hearing, or this is just direction, right?
This is direction from council, so certainly we should take public comment if we have any. And otherwise,
If you don't have any questions right now, we'll open it up to public comment. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on item 11 or item 12?
Procedural question. There's 2 commissioners in the room. Are we allowed to speak?
well, we haven't noticed this as a meeting of the Site and Architecture Commission, but we also don't have a quorum of them, so I don't see a problem. So yes,
Yes.
yes, if you want to provide comment as a member of the public, certainly that's not a problem.
Maybe I'll keep it simple and just.
All right. Then back to the council for discussion. Councilmember Labouvet.
So I can, this has been pending for 5 months now, and so I'm happy that it's finally coming back and finally getting some traction. I can maybe clarify some of these questions because I was the one that brought this forward and I wrestled it onto the agenda and so forth. The original thinking behind this resolution is not to change any of the decision body current requirements in the municipal code, is to, retain all of those decision, decisions for the city council. What the intention was to leverage the deep expertise of the current Site and Architecture Committee. Now, Site and Architecture Committee, from time to time changes members and so forth, but there is a recognition that that body, are residents, and so we deeply value their inputs, and B, there is some deep expertise there, which, the council very much values. And I think kind of item C is that we have limited staff with our city, and so another point of view is always appreciated. And so, I think as far as the questions are concerned, I think the answer is pretty much no to everything except for the last bullet where it asks, does not specifically mention zoning amendments. To me, a change is an amendment, and so to me, those are the same. And so yes, the implication is that any changes from a land use matter, the resolution intended for that to be routed through the Site and Architecture Committee for a recommendation before it came to the council. And so we can continue with that discussion, or we can just move to a motion.
Can I add something to that too? I think the primary motivation for having site and architecture in this role initially was because many times when we didn't see site and architecture, the council would be left to make decisions based on reading the problems that came in, and we had no background. And so we wanted to use site and architecture as a voice to say, hey, here are some of the problems, and here are some of the recommendations that we have to mitigate some of the problems that we were seeing with a lot of the applications.
If I can interject, I don't disagree with that. When I came on in this city, I asked if I could take some things to site and architecture when we were amending the tree preservation ordinance. They're the decision-making body on tree removals. So I thought, it doesn't say that we take it to site and architecture for the recommendation, but I thought it important to get their input. And actually, when I came on, site and architecture actually had an ad hoc committee that had been working on changes to the requirements for site development permit. So that's what got me thinking. There are instances where their input is very valuable to code changes. So we've kind of been, quite honestly, using our best judgment to when to take things to them. When we're changing, a lot of the changes we've made to clarify, like fence regulations and the tree preservation. Although we didn't take this ADU thing to them because they don't see ADUs. So yeah, we could have taken it to them, but they don't play a role in the approval process. So our judgment was just to bring it to you guys. I think it is valuable from a staff standpoint to get their input, quite honestly. And then that same value provides input to you all. Whether we put that in ordinance language or we create a policy, I'd look to the attorney to see what the best approach is to that. But it's clearly the intent of any planning staff to solicit input on any sort of changes. And sometimes, sometimes it's better to err with more work than less because, we've yet really to kind of go full public with a lot of these sorts of things. But the next step would be when there's a broad brush change to things that are really going to affect the public and their ability to input, how do we go about soliciting that input? I did bring up, I know there's suggestions relative to noticing. Well, I think that's needed to be looked into. At the same time, does everything have to get the same level of noticing? Maybe not, because it will potentially impact the time frame that property owners are going to have to spend getting their projects through a design review hearing, that sort of thing. So I think there is opportunity for a lot of changes to process. I think the question is, do they have to be, put changes in a commission status, or can they be done through a policy? And can we really dive into the whole range of projects, decisions? And again, I don't want to diminish this city's, the issues that they deal with, but how often do we deal with certain issues? The only land use zoning change we've made was Hacienda. That's it. And then what was the last one before that? I don't know.
No one can remember.
So again, so it's really kind of, thinking through what does this community really deal with, and what is the best approach to making sure that when we do deal with them, we've got, the best recommendations, either from another commission and or staff. What's the best approach to noticing? Is it more of a citywide issue, or is it more localized? A tree removal that goes to site and architecture, do we have to do 500, maybe 300? If it's a brand-new two-story home or whatever, maybe it's 500. If it's a larger subdivision or whatnot, maybe we do 1,000. So again, there's ways to address those based on kind of the level of interest that you would anticipate for certain sorts of projects. So, I think staff's suggestion of if we do like a joint study session is to really kind of get that discussion going between the two bodies, so that, understanding what is you really want to accomplish, and how the best approach taken can do that. And whether or not you do a wholesale change to an existing site and architectural commission. Because again, regardless of whether or not they're going to deal with land use issues, if they are a land use body, they're going to have to be educated. They're going to go to annual conferences and stuff like that. And they'll deal with one subdivision every 5 years or every 10 years. So I think getting that discussion, and then, getting the input from the attorney as to how we can approach accomplishing what we really want to accomplish, I think will better balance.
I think what I'd like to look at here is it possible to have a collaborative relationship with site and architecture and yourself, so that if there are problems that come up, that you can resolve it, let's say between two neighbors, right?
Oh, I think we do that right now. I think, quite honestly, in the 3.5 years I've been here, I think there's, I don't know, I've got a long-standing commissioner here, but there've been, two controversial issues, and there are projects that they work together. We get conditions and permits relative to construction staging, things like that. So a lot of that is staff and the commission working at the hearings to address a lot of the items so that they don't come to the council on appeal. I mean, there's been one, and there'll be another one coming, but 2 items on appeal in the 3.5 years. So I think that's reflective of the good work that the Site and Architectural Commission does relative to addressing design issues. Because again, that's where their real expertise lies, because that's the bulk of what they deal with.
So is this a way in which we can formalize that relationship, that collaborative relationship that I guess we want
Between
planning, between yourself and site and architecture, and so we can resolve problems?
Well, we had already formalized in Title 13, right, where we had formally made site and architecture a recommendation body for
the subdivisions on scenic and
for only scenic corridor, and so
and
the idea
hillside
was
and scenic corridors.
so
yeah.
the idea was to expand that beyond scenic corridor.
And they already are identified as a recommending body, that when there's like a site and architectural permit that goes along with either a variance or another use permit, they look at that, and they'll recommend to the council. I do a full staff report. So the variances that come to you that are also associated with site and architectural, site development permit, have gone to them for their recommendation. So that's already a codified requirement. It's typically referred to as a unified process, so that it just all goes to council.
But only for scenic corridor today, and this.
Not on the, for subdivisions, but on the variances,
Right.
it is already codified and has been for, ever since I've been here, that any other permit associated with an approval at the council level, the commission is a recommending body and not the decision-making body on that permit. So they recommend, and it all goes to you for the final decision. So, and we've been doing that for, I think most of the, with the exception of one variance, they've all gone through the Site and Architectural Commission with a recommendation onto council.
So Jeannie brought up also, or Ms. Hamilton, sorry, I'm being
Okay.
informal, this advantage of if, you have a planning commission and a council and the relationship and so forth, it does sort of de-risk the situation in that, if the planning commission were to rule something down, then there is an appeal process, and so that usually mitigates litigation. I think in the same case, and that was also an intention for me anyways, was that by having a recommendation board for usually these, bigger land use issues, it does take a recommendation plus a yes from council to get to a full yes. And usually the soft yes or the recommendation or the soft no from the architecture side can either encourage or discourage, the applicant. And so there is always that two-step process to get to yes and to get to no. So I like that.
I'm not following that. I mean, if the Site and Architecture is the decision-making body,
So for example, what I'm saying is, okay, we're not asking Site and Architecture to be a decision body in any of these matters. We're asking them to be a recommendation body. But it does come with the side effect of this two-step process. And if Site and Architecture does recommend no, that can be enough of a deterrent for the project not to move forward and move to council for a
I'm
final
glad you
vote.
think so.
Well,
It's never been that, quite honestly,
Yeah, and frankly, if
that's
the site
not
and
my experience.
if the Site and Architecture Commission recommended no, the city council would still have to make a decision.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So they would be, the applicant's entitled to a decision one way or the other, regardless
But
of what
we
the
would have,
recommendation
we
is.
would have that additional input as to their opinion, and
Sure.
so, again, I think the initial intent was not to overburden the site and architecture team. There should be few of these that come up. Monte Sereno's a small place, and we don't have a lot of land use ordinances coming down, and so I think that the resolution stands. Hopefully we can clarify by motion that we want to move forward with resolution 3748 as drafted, and define any changes as, all changes of any type for land use matters, and retain site and architecture as a recommendation body and the city council as a decision body.
So I guess one question I have for you, Councilman Lefebvre, is to that last bullet point, and that question about zone changes versus zoning changes. Was the intention to be more individual lots and any change affecting individual lots, or was it your intention on this that it would be zoning changes if we were looking at changing a area of zoning in the city, more of a general plan type of change, that would be what you were trying to capture here with the
I think it
site
can be
plan?
both. It's basically all of the above, that, again, recognizing the deep expertise of the Site and Architecture Committee, the fact that they're residents, they've lived here a long time, having that extra opinion, I think, can weigh heavily on the council decision. So that was the intent.
I guess I'm wondering if we say zone or zoning changes and the site and architecture as a recommending body, I'm thinking, just imagining, again, the big zoning change that might have to come down probably post-2023 with some sort of a major zoning change. Would it be, and this is a question for council, if we needed to hold a bunch of public hearings about potentially a zoning change to the city, like with the public multifamily type of change that was discussed before in the last cycle, could we do that jointly so that meetings were noticed, so that when we're having a public hearing and inviting everyone to come to Dave's Elementary and listening to 50 or 100 people speak, that is a joint meeting of the site and architecture and council with the public, and then from that, site and architecture is going to be offering us recommendations, and then we're going to be moving forward? Or does it have to always be separated if we're doing it that way?
In my thoughts is you could do them, like if you were doing a study session, certainly you could do them together.
I think we're like, again, we're trying to leverage the expertise of site and architecture, not slow down the process or make this more cumbersome for everybody, which is, I think, I mean, if we went to a full planning commission, it makes it less cumbersome for us and more cumbersome for them, but that's not really what anybody's intent is. It's get that expertise without making this too much more complicated. And then I think maybe going back to staff as well, staff would normally work with planning to get things queued up where there's going to be a recommendation, but occasionally, if it was big enough, we would all get involved from the beginning, so we wouldn't have to do things twice.
I definitely, well, I agree with you on the fact that the planning commission idea seems to be way too complicated, but I like the idea of holding a joint session with site and architecture so that we can really develop that relationship that we want to have and iron out what it is that we can work on together. I mean,
Yeah, and that
why
was,
not engage them in the process?
and that was the other thing, I think, when Councilmember LaBouffet brought this up, was because, one, we wanted their expertise, and two, there was maybe some frustration that some of our commissions, not necessarily site and architecture, but that they weren't always being as integrated with council and brought in and listened to as they should be. And so I think your comment there, which is maybe we can get a study session going, get together, and find out if there's any fine tuning that they would be recommending we do, because they haven't been able to speak up and tell us that yet. As in, we want a recommending body, like you're saying. Any fine tuning they're recommending to how we do that?
Well, since this has been sitting on the table for 5 months now, I think that we should move it forward. This is literally a loophole in, with respect to what we've already defined in Chapter 13 for scenic corridor. One of the intents here was to close loopholes. And so I would really like to move this forward and close these loopholes and get this moving. And in addition, as a second step, we can certainly go back and have a joint session and share best practices and so forth. But I don't, this is sort of a do no harm type resolution in my mind. I don't think it seems from what Jeannie was saying that we're already in many regards working in this same way. So, but there needs to be clarity in the code as to formalize
Well, working
this.
in ways which we've had the opportunity, we haven't, with the exception of the hacienda, there have been no zoning map changes, no other real land use. There have been no use permits that have come.
I mean,
since
we
we've been here,
we could
but-
sort of point out that hacienda never went to site and architecture for any sort of site development review. And so, to me, that was a sort of a gap in the process. And so, the fact that site and architecture is on scenic corridor, okay, that loophole is now closed, but, there could be another subdivision somewhere else that comes up that is not on scenic corridor, and therefore, this resolution would apply.
All right. Well, I'm fine with it as is, but I do like the idea of still holding a joint session. I think that would
I
be
do
very
too.
helpful for all of us.
I think that'd be, and I think, you know, that'll be coming up soon on the agenda also, to try to formalize that.
So where are we now? Do we need to?
Do we have a motion to
I don't
leave the code as is?
think,
We don't?
We don't have to do any. kind of
I
motion.
don't think we're looking for you to vote on anything tonight. I think
Oh.
we just needed you to provide some discussion and direction.
Okay. So I mean, I think that the direction would be, you know, as clarified, that changes are amendments and zoning land use matters, and does that clarify
Yes,
direction?
thank you.
Recommending body.
As the recommended, you know, so we keep recommending body and council as decision body, and that's that.
And also, you wanted a joint session with A&S,
And,
As an
yes,
joint study
Side note,
session,
yes.
as a second step.
in a timely manner.
But, you know, we would like to move this forward as quickly as possible to implementation phase.
Okay.
Seeing that it's been outstanding
Okay.
for 5 months.
I've got what I need.
Okay. Great. Ready to move on? Committee, commission reports. Any council members have anything to report?
None.
Nope. Council member comments. City manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. A member of the public requested that we place on the agenda the review of our fence ordinance, so I will bring that to council as a discussion item as well in the near future. In consultation with our chief of police, I will be posting information to our website for the process involved for residents to establish neighborhood watch programs. There's been an interest in that lately, so we will get the information out on the web. We have new LED lights in the ceiling this evening. I don't know if you noticed the brightness. Save up to 60% on our energy. Lastly, we received a request this week from the Cities Association to draft a form letter to send it to our state, it was actually last week it came, but to draft a form letter to send to our state legislators on behalf of the city of Monte Sereno, opposing aspects of the newly revised version of Senate Bill 50. And I will draft a response to that letter and send it to the legislators, Jerry Hill and Scott Wiener, as it applies to Monte Sereno. And that's all I have to report. I will get that in by the 23rd.
All right, thank you. Any council members have future agenda items? Nope. Then we will now adjourn the city council meeting at 9:35.